Hello everyone and welcome to the Rippling Pages podcast, interviews with writers. I'm Liam Bishop, a writer from Leeds, and I'm here today with Sarah Schofield. Sarah's stories have appeared in a wide range of journals. She's also been shortlisted for the Bridport Prize, the Guardian Travel Writing Competition, while also being a winner of the Orange New Voices Prize. Her debut collection of stories, Safely Gathered In, was published by Common Press toward the end of last year. And in that collection, she uses a range of voices, modes, and narrative styles. She takes us through the contents of a storage facility, details the different elements of a course called Nostalgia for Beginners, while also using more conventional narrative modes. Doing so makes us feel safely gathered in the confines of the story, but she deploys elements of the surreal so we never feel entirely comfortable. Sarah is also a creative writing lecturer at Edge Hill University. So Sarah, this series is all about what's beneath the surface. Your stories start with a dead husband sending messages to his wife from beyond the grave as she tries to make a new life with a new partner. And in doing so, we're introduced to a writer with a keen eye for the macabre, but also the surreal and unsettling. Can you just talk a bit more about these relationships and all the different dynamics that are going on? Because there's quite a lot of work in there.
Yeah, so as you just mentioned, there's obviously the relationship between the dead husband and the wife, and the negotiations that he's still speaking to her through these emails, but she is unable to speak back because he's deceased. So that's a really interesting dynamic that I wanted to explore. What do you do with that kind of one-way conversation? How do you react to that? There was issues within their relationship. It wasn't a perfect relationship, what relationship is, but there was lots that was unspoken within their relationship already. So again, that's another interesting element that I wanted to explore in that work. And what things do we say, what things don't we say, the things we do, the things we don't do in our interactions with each other. I really love stories that have characters who are really authentic, and it's always about their relationships with other people. I think that give us that authenticity. How people interact with each other is endlessly fascinating to me, and I wanted to have a really forensic examination of that within this story, particularly across my fiction more generally, but with this story, that was the thing I was really interested in exploring. There's writers such as Elizabeth Baines, who I admire hugely for the way she negotiates relationships in her stories. They are so authentic, and you'll be reading something from her and have that moment of, oh gosh, I know that feeling because I've had that experience when I've been interacting with that friend or that relation, that relation to me. So yes, so it's all about these different ways that we're interacting. And of course, there's Kathy, Emmy's sister. So Emmy's the main character, and then her sister Kathy, and the way that they interact, because they're sisters, they've known each other forever. There is a slightly different power play there, different balance of power, and exploring that, what is kind of just submerged in what they don't say to each other. I really wanted to explore that and investigate that a little bit through the story.
That's really interesting, and there's a lot going on beneath the surface because, like I said, this husband's sending messages from. It calls it a dead man switch, isn't it? The mechanism is a dead, which is the name of the story, and how it sort of sends these. But what he's sending, it's not P.S. I love you, is it? He's not sending, nice, lovely messages. He's sending reminders about MOTs and travel insurance and that kind of thing. Why did you choose to create the messages like this? Why were they reminders for things like this rather than something more romantic?
I think it's because it's who he was. His character, he was always the kind of the organizer, the doer, the person that filled up the bird feeders, the person that booked the holidays. He had that kind of role within their relationship, and not always at Emmy's choice. She's finding that there's things that she really enjoys doing now, and so, but his language of love to her was by doing, and whether he and she were aware of that or not, that was the way they played their relationship with each other. And the idea of actually him trying to be helpful in the same way that he had in life, but in death, and him just maybe being a little bit blind to the fact that maybe wasn't what she needed or wanted. But then I also wanted to put an element of like, actually, was there something in there that's quite helpful? And it's not entirely, I didn't want to be entirely sort of one thing or the other. I want them to be a bit of a grey area where people are kind of querying. She did stay with him, she stayed with him in the marriage, so before he passed away. So that was a choice that she was actively making. So I want there to be a bit of doubt and a bit of speculation there. Incidentally, after writing this story, I found out that there actually is a company that you can do this with, and people, that you can arrange for emails to be sent in this way. So if anyone reads the story and thinks, oh, that's a cracking idea.
Did you get any inspiration then from the company, or did you find out afterwards that this was a thing?
Believe it or not, only afterwards. Quite often that happens. You'll think that you've created something entirely original, or completely unbelievable, or completely quantifiable, and then you find out it actually does exist in the real world. And sometimes that can be quite a shocking thing to find. My inspiration actually came from two places. Firstly, the William and Mary Roald Dahl story that I actually mentioned in the story itself, with the guy with his eye and his brain in a pickling jar. And I wanted to explore that idea a little bit more. But actually, often it comes from like two or three things will nudge you in a direction of a story. And the other thing was that my dad actually passed away a number of years ago. But then a few years after he died, an email arrived in my inbox from his email address, and it wasn't anything at all. It was just a kind of a glitch or some sort of internet weirdness. But for that moment where you see that email pop up from somebody that isn't here anymore, it is a bit of a kind of a moment of like, oh, you think, what's going on here? And it's that idea of that almost haunting through technology, which is quite intriguing, and something that I think I might want to explore a bit more in the future as well.
Yeah, well, the reason I ask is because there is a lot of that kind of surreal, techno-inspired, I think uncanniness. I don't know if you can call it that. I mean, I'm sorry to hear about your father, and I can't imagine what it was like to sort of have this email pop up.
He would have really enjoyed it, actually. I think that, and I didn't. It was a little moment of like, oh, but it was something that he would have thought was brilliant. And yeah, he was an aspiring writer. He wanted to be a writer, I think, and I think he would be quite happy with that being a little bit of a nudge towards this story.
Well, the title story, Safely Gathered In, that is about things that have been stored. And some very weird and sort of strange things that have been kept. But it's also that kind of weird, I guess there's a kind of corporate element to it. There's that kind of futuristic, I don't know what we're going to call it, kind of techno kind of vibe about it. But can you just tell us a bit more about Safely Gathered In before we go into it?
Of course, yeah. So this is a story where there was two things I wanted to do. Firstly, I wanted to see if I could write a story without any characters directly in view. So all the characters are sort of off stage, and all we see is the things that they own that are in these little compartments of this self-storage unit. So that was the first thing I wanted to explore, this kind of characterless landscape. And then the second thing I wanted to explore was I wanted to collage things together. I wanted to see if I could draw sort of three elements and weave them together to make them into a narrative. So we have the voice of the self-storage unit promo, I would probably describe it as. Googled and looked up lots of different self-storage units and found out that kind of voice, that tone that they promote themselves in, and used that with woven through the text. That's the voice that kind of speaks through the work intermittently. Then we have the inventory lists of the things that each person keeps within their unit. And then we also have this sort of third element that suggested itself halfway through the process of writing. I knew it needed something else, but it's from an old harvest hymn called Come Ye Thankful People. And it's just lines from that sometimes they are precisely as they are in the song, and then other times I've sort of twisted them or edited them to mirror what's happening in the story. So those three elements, I really love the idea of kind of finding text and pulling it together to make something new, sort of like recycling. So those are those three elements drawn together, collaging together to create something original. And that isn't something that I invented. Obviously, there'll be poets that are listening will know that that's something that has been occurring sort of like historically in poetry for a long time. And the work of people like Adrian Henri, who did New Fast Automatic Daffodils, that's thrown together with it's the Wordsworth poem plus lines from an advert for the daffodil car, I think, which came out in 1967. So it becomes a bit of a game, and I want the reader to maybe look at the units and maybe have speculation about who owns those things and the shape of the person that's missing from that moment.
This is Unit 97. So he takes through these different units. Unit 97 got one Persian rug circa 1890 rolled, one Edwardian dining table and 10 upholstered chairs, one portrait, oil on canvas, woman with auburn hair and amber beads, 9 pairs of damask curtains. Sort of continues, got a set of National Geographic edition, April 1950 to December 1991. And then we have one Tupperware box containing hair and dust labelled sweepings. Unit 87 has got 122 cans of Tesco value baked beans, 122 tins of John West tuna chunks, 122 tins of Prince's corned beef, 12 bags of Aldi family-sized penne pasta. So there's some very there's an eclectic mix here. There's someone here that's preparing for a pandemic, perhaps, and there's another person that is that's I don't know what they're up to. I'm not going to lie, but I find it interesting that you call your stories. You've shot this story is about recycled elements or keeping hold of things, and you've recycled certain things to create new meanings and new identities. But I find that interesting because your stories have the appearance of being very tightly controlled. They're crafted. Every kind of sentence has its place and its meaning. You've got a lot to balance out, and I guess it requires that kind of element of control. But when you look at this one, when you come down to it, it's basically descriptions, lists of. I mean, there's other things in there, obviously, but there's lists of items. The choices you made then in going into some of those units, what were those choices, I guess?
So I know who owns each unit, but I don't need the people reading it to have the same ideas. I love the idea of the reader almost standing in that unit and looking around and going, who is this person that owns this stuff? It's sort of a bit like, who lives in a house like this? It's that kind of, how much do our possessions speak to who we are or what we are or what's important to us? There's a big movement now about decluttering, and I just think, no, it's okay to hold on to things that have some sort of meaning or importance to you. I mean, there is a limit, isn't there?
We were talking about this idea that it speaks about our desire to kind of hold on to things, the kind of decluttering and that kind of movement for decluttering. I mean, I don't know if this relates to any. I don't know if it came from sort of being inspired by the pandemic and stuck indoors with our possessions more or not, or but there's something in there. There's something very, even if it's the pandemic or not, there's something very human about holding on to our possessions. I find it hard to take them away for whatever reason.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I wrote this story pre-pandemic, so it wasn't influenced by that at all. But there's definitely, I really feel that objects hold a lot of resonance. So, and maybe not everyone feels like this. Maybe there's people who are listening that don't have this relationship with objects. And I'm not talking about every single object that we own, but I think, for a lot of the things that we decide to keep in our lives, they hold memory, they hold resonance, they have connectedness to things or times or places that we find important and compelling. And I think particularly at the moment with the way data is collected about everything that we do, whether it's what we do in the gym or we document our lives on social media, or it's almost like, I think a lot of the time it's because as humans we're really scared of forgetting. And this idea of, if something else can hold the memory for us, then that's quite useful. A lot of people use self-storage just to keep stuff in that has no real, necessity or need. But it's this fear of letting go. And I think there's a line, isn't there? I think I like to have things around me that are key. And I'm just looking around my desk now, actually, and, there's things that I have around me that hold resonance or importance or significance, but maybe there is a limit to how much you can actually hold on to and how much you can expect other things to hold memory for you as a person in your life. And I think that's the interesting thing about containment, isn't it? How much can we contain ourselves within our minds, our brains, and that fear of things dispersing away from us.
Yeah, that's what I find really interesting in these stories. There's a physical capacity to objects and things, even though it might not seem like it sometimes. But there's a psychological capacity. There's an emotional capacity, I think, to although it might seem difficult to sort of let go of certain possessions, the amount of sentimental value, it can be difficult, I think, to hold on to even ideas. Ideas can be damaging sometimes, to hold on to. And that's what I found about these stories and about Safely Gathered In, this idea of safely gathered in. I saw sometimes I was questioning, what are the ideas of containment in here? What the kind of, when is containment safe? When is it not as safe? And this idea of containment as imagery, it relates to the craft of the stories, but it's also a very psychological idea as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as soon as you put the word safely before something, you're implying that it's actually not safe, aren't you? If you have to say that something's safe, then the subtext of that is that there is some sort of danger or threat. So yeah, the idea of being safely gathered in is, it actually implying the opposite, that it's not safe at all. There's a few kind of, the title is quite significant, really, because it reflects the stories that, obviously Safely Gathered In, the story is about how we hold things to us, we gather our possessions. But there's also something maybe a little bit more broad in the terms of that you've touched on there, that maybe are the characters within the collection. I wanted to explore that idea of, how gathered in are we with our lives and our interactions. What is that interplay in terms of the way we gather, the way we hold together? But there's also a bit of a little bit of reflection that is really just for me, actually, in the title Safely Gathered In, because I have been transitioning to a slightly different way of writing, and this collection was put together with stories over the last 10 years, almost actually exactly 10 years, the publication date. So for me, my original way of writing, how I began writing, was to try and sort of tuck everything in very tightly, make sure everything is kind of very much there and really gathered in and held in. I want it to be dialectic. I don't want it to be that I'm directing a reader in any way, but at the same time, I needed this thing to be really controlled. I'm a Virgo, maybe I'm a bit of a control freak, maybe that's what that's about. But more recently, my writing over the last few years, I've been trying to be a bit more open, trying to explore and experiment with more of an open writing style. And a lot of that is or in part down to a period of time over the last 10 years that Tania Hershman, who's an incredible writer, was doing some mentoring work with me through the WOA mentoring scheme. And Tania's feedback was just brilliant. It was all about kind of breaking the text open a little bit, making a bit of room, just pulling things out a bit and being a bit bolder and a bit braver. And that was so critical to me in sort of developing my my craft and my practice. And it's something that I'm still working on, but it's this idea of kind of moving away from that gathering and into a more open space of writing.
What does that look like then? How do you, I think there's a sense, isn't there? I feel this sometimes when I'm, even if it's not fiction, you kind of feel maybe you want to control what people read to an extent. There's a kind of fear of letting something go. But what does a more open style of writing look like? Does it relate to what kind of information you give about this?
It's a really good question. So interestingly, the sort of gathering in aspect of it isn't necessarily about me wanting to direct the reader. I really love it when readers read into things in their own way, and I want them, once the story's out, it's not mine anymore, it's for everyone else to, it's for the reader to decide what's going on. And that's very much, I like that. I like that it's from my brain and then it goes to their brain, and then because they have a whole different perspective and a whole different life, they'll connect to it and take from it in different ways, and that's really exciting. So it's not really about that. It's more about that I need to know all the answers, or I need to know what the story's fully about, and actually moving away from that and being a bit more open to the possibility that I don't have all the answers, and I don't know the psychology of every single character in there to the nth degree. So it's sort of like a personal letting go, really, and kind of stepping out and just trusting the process, I guess.
Yeah, I just wonder what that will sort of, it might not be a thing that the reader necessarily detects. It might be kind of more of a, like I said, a personal kind of thing for you. But that idea of gathered in, it is and especially when you do talk about psychology, it is, we say to people, don't we, contain yourself, keep, contain your emotions, keep yourself in check, that kind of thing. Most of these characters are contained within themselves to an extent. I don't know, so maybe it might be more characters that are less contained.
That's interesting. And maybe the characters, there's certain characters that are just completely absent. So there's the characters in Safely Gathered In, with their storage units, they're very absent. Then there's the husband in the first story in Deb and Switch, he's absent. And then we have the boy in The Sun in Under the Foil, who's completely absent as well. He's disappeared. So there's a sense of like stepping out of the moment in those kind of, I think we're not often encouraged, like you say, to be open emotionally, like fully open to messy emotions and displaying that publicly. That kind of containment is something that is often part of the culture, isn't it? That you like you say, contain yourself, keep a lid on it. So that's maybe absenting completely is sort of a part of that. Characters that go away quietly to be messy emotionally.
No, it's certainly it's a prevailing attitude, isn't it? And your stories are about how can be a problematic term, as sometimes it is it can be difficult to do that. It's not always a healthy thing to do, is it? I guess. Yeah. But I look forward to seeing where what this kind of new style brings out, or new kind of approach. Yeah. It sounds like a new approach rather than new style, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's about just freshening and finding new direction. So part of this is this idea of drawing together, texts or pieces of writing that already exist. And so I've done that in a couple of the stories in the collection already, but this is the new direction. I'm calling it literature trouvé or lit trouvé. It's a bit like object trouvé, but it's with text. And things like shopping lists that you find in the trolley at Tesco that someone's written, and
I don't know if you're like me, but I keep it's obviously notes on your phone. I have everything on there. I have shopping lists, I have writing notes, I have reviewing, I have notes for interviews. But there's something about, I don't like getting rid of those, like the shopping list. There's something about they have their place within all these kind of other, I don't know, more literary ideas. But there's something in that.
I think so, and I think I'm interested in quite domestic stuff, and I think for a long time the domestic has been seen as perhaps lower brow or less literary, and I disagree with that wholeheartedly, because it's the heart of things. It's the place where we feel we can, people feel most exposed. It's the place where those relationships are negotiated. So I think exploring the stuff of the domestic space, or the everyday, and putting it under the microscope, because I think ultimately that's what short fiction does. It takes one thing and allows people that short space of time to really look at it, think about what is going on there, and actually by drawing two or three things together and collecting them, almost like a little collage of different things, a bit like what I did with the Safely Gathered In. It one kind of plays off the other, and I'm interested in those interplays. So at the moment I'm looking at a thesis that is in our archive here at Edgehill. I'm an Edgehill University lecturer, and we've got an amazing archive and a fantastic team of archivists. And I'm spending some time in the archive and looking at some resources. We're putting together a bit of an archive showcase with other colleagues in other departments into research of these items. And the thing that I found that I really want to look at is a 1960s thesis on the science of trampolining, which I just think is such a brilliant contradiction, because to most people, you get on a trampoline and you bounce and it's that joyful freedom. But this thesis that I spent a little bit of time with last week, it's forensically pulling apart the science, the sort of physiology, the physical attributes of each bounce action and maintenance of the trampoline, and all these really kind of technical details. And it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful document, and it's got these illustrations, these hand-drawn illustrations in. Wow. And I'm going to write a story using it. I don't kind of know how or what, but it's this idea of bringing that piece of work that has nothing to do with literature into the literature arena and exploring it and giving us space to look at it and think about an idea using that.
They'd created their batter gardens in the middle of a heat wave. Kay remembers the stifling face mask, her hands sweating inside latex gloves. They'd worked in pairs, Georgie with Kay, making the coloured bacteria from inserts the previous lesson and loading them into pens with pipettes. Gathering round the front desk, Kay remembered Georgie standing close to her, the feeling of her breath on her cheek. They watched the teacher's hands tremble as she drew a tree onto the demonstration. "Remember, children," she'd said, "you'll be taking these home as Mother's Day gifts, so think about your beautiful garden design. Think about shape and form, but leave plenty of blank space for it to colonise." Back at their workbench, opposite her, Georgie was tracing her mother's face in purple and green onto the transparent biofilm from a photograph laid underneath. Kay's eyes prickled. She blinked away the unbidden picture of her own mother being washed by the Maldivian nurse who'd been staying with them a few weeks ago, who'd beckoned Kay into the hushed bedroom and pressed the damp flannel into her palm.
Yeah, I thought you were interested in science or experimentation, but it comes with this sense of what's been found. But why was it the trampoline thesis that came to you? And who was the author behind it? Was there any kind of relation to that? Or
yeah, so we've been trying to trace the author, somebody called Edward Moon, and we've been doing the archivists, particularly Dan Copley in the archive, have been working really hard trying to trace him. They've been talking to alumni, because I did want to find out a little bit more about him, and also for copyright purposes we have to make sure that we do everything correctly. But why that thesis? I mean, there's so many beautiful and intriguing things that are held in the archive at Edgehill, but there was something when I first saw this particular piece of work, it just struck a chord. And I think it's that contradiction of it being something that so scientifically looking at something that is ultimately, for most of us, it's about the pleasure, that moment, being in the air, being suspended and being momentarily not of the earth. It's like an other place, isn't it? So there's that element of it that I just find massively intriguing. And also I have 2 young children and they love trampolining. So I'm thinking, do I look at do I draw other trampoline related documents into this? And there's also something a bit more nuanced in there, in the fact that when I'm reading a short story, I don't want to be looking at metaphorically. I don't want to be looking at all the springs and the way that the frame is constructed, and I don't want to be thinking about how I'm supposed to move in that short story. I just want to enjoy the lift. I want to be in the moment and experiencing it. I expect the writer to have built the trampoline and to have created the story that gives me that moment. If I'm just reading it for enjoyment, if I'm studying it to teach it or to explore it with students, then it's slightly different. But for a lot of that mechanism to be sort of tucked away, out of the way, and for there to be space on the trampoline bed to bounce and enjoy the story. I don't know if that really makes any sense, and maybe this is stretching the metaphor ever so slightly, but it's an idea that I keep coming around to, and yeah, how much do we as writers do we show our working out, and how much do we just allow people to be in the moment?
I think that's a difficulty that we have as writers, isn't it? That we I think it becomes harder, doesn't it, to sort of enjoy that lift, as you say, that kind of moment of suspension. Because it does, for me, that's the kind of I feel about sort of, reading fiction. It's a moment of suspension where you, I guess, with any kind of art form or entertainment or whatever, it is that lift, isn't it? That moment of suspension where you let go of some kind of ideas about the world that allow you to explore this fictional construct. But what I found is, I find it interesting that it is about something you found, something that you've come across, and whether or not it's scientifically valid, whether it's right or wrong in its assumptions, or it's mathematics, that doesn't matter. And this is what I find interesting about your story, is that sometimes it doesn't matter what the kind of reality, I think to the emails of the Dead Man Switch, and I think to the storage company, it's about creating enough to kind of make us believe in it. And we do believe in it. We do feel we are within these units looking at all these weird items. But why on earth would why would these items be all together in this one particular unit? And it is that sense of, like I said, of finding something that does recur. That is a unifying theme within your stories, I would say. I was just reading an interview, and you said that you used to write stories as a child, and then you found all these stories because your father had kept them. What was that experience like, to kind of find these? I've not always wanted to be a writer, I know that much, but for you, in this, it seems like this has definitely been the case. And then you found all these stories that you had written as a child that I guess you'd long forgotten those.
Yeah, I'd always made little books, and so finding them was lovely. It was really a bit strange, sort of going back to, sometimes when you look back at things or photos of yourself, or bits of video clip, or even like if you've ever done that thing where you've scrolled back to like messages you sent 5 years ago or something, and you revisit a person that you were back then, and it was you, but maybe it can feel a bit like a different person, or like a different world, or because it is, isn't it? It's, your path, what is the phrase, the past is a different country. So that idea of going back to something is interesting. But yeah, they weren't staggering works of genius. They were just 6-year-olds writing rubbish, but enjoying the process of creating narrative and making a story that sort of threaded together from one scene to the next, and drawing pictures that were really, really awful. But I sort of feel quite nurturing towards that child who did that.
No, that's nice. And that's nice that I just because there is a lot of finding things, rediscovering things. And I just wondered then what it was sort of like to kind of see what the feeling was, to find that these are being kept hold of, but you hadn't kept hold of them, somebody else had kept hold of them. They had a bigger value, I guess, for somebody else than they did you.
Very much so. I think it is that thing, isn't it, of seeing the things that people hold on to, and the fact that he'd held on to those. I think there was a degree that Dad I think he wanted to be a writer, and I think, we all hope to. We can't all live out all of our dreams, but maybe we hope for our children, or the young people that are around us, whether it be nieces, nephews, people that are in our families, that we kind of hope that the things that maybe we don't achieve, they'll be able to achieve. And it was quite moving to see that he'd hung on to those. However, he'd also hung on to a load of newspapers from the 60s and 70s, and we had no idea why, and we scoured the pages of those newspapers thinking there must be something, maybe there was a little article or a feature or something, did he write something and it's in there, but nothing. And we agonized over it for many evenings with a glass of wine in hand, trying to see what and in the end we're like, right, okay, I think we can get rid of these, but you kind of feel that responsibility, don't you, that burden of it maybe being something important. And I think any person who's had to deal with had to process the possessions of somebody that's no longer with us has probably experienced that too. That what do you keep, what do you pass on, what do you do with the things that surrounded them?
Just these reams of newspaper articles that I know kind of.
There were big papers as well. Like the really big ones.
Strange, isn't it? Stranger things you find. But yeah, I mean, there's an idea that I think also prevails in your stories, and it's about how creations have a life of their own, or can have a life of their own. I think to your story, the Backtoe Garden, I won't say, well, I'll sort of let you sort of describe what that Backtoe Garden is, but I find it sort of summarizes this idea that there is, whatever we create can have a life of its own that extends beyond its parameters that we sort of set it.
The idea in Backtoe Garden is we are several years into the future, and there's a lot of climate crisis occurring. So a lot of people are climate refugees. There's lots of strain on cities to contain everybody. The whole way people eat is different, and there's, across the whole of it, there is this technology called synthetic biology, and just like any new technology, it itself is inert. It has no good or bad. It's what we as humans do with it that can have positive or negative or neutral or mixed effects. So my two main characters in Backtoe Garden, one of them is a high-end Michelin-starred chef who uses everything that she cooks in her restaurant is synthetically engineered, and she makes these incredible, delicious, kind of spectacular dishes with synthetic biology. And then her counterpart, who they went to school together, has grown up to become she uses synthetic biology to repair cracks in buildings that are no longer stable because of the increased numbers of humans in smaller spaces. So on the surface of it, we have this kind of using it for good and using it for bad with synthetic biology, but I wanted it to be a little bit more nuanced than that. And I wanted to take us back to the roots of their childhood, where they learned about synthetic biology in a classroom, growing it almost like, I don't know if people remember the crystal gardens used to be able to grow, where you put a little bit of water at the bottom of the paper tree and it all soaks it up and then grows these beautiful crystals. So kind of a bit like that, but with synthetic biology. And it's just so matter of fact. It's just like a thing they learn in the classroom when they're of a certain age. Everyone learns it. Everyone's a bit bored of it, but they both go home with a little Backtoe garden. And the main character, she has released her Backtoe garden into the wild, where it has continued to grow and grow over a number of years and do its own thing, and it has that freedom to kind of just be organically spreading, whereas the high-end chef uses her synthetic biology learning then goes on for her to be quite controlled with how she uses it. And so there's something quite interesting there in terms of maybe my different writing approaches mirroring the two characters there. This is very psychological, but this idea of and all of the science in it is absolutely accurate. I worked on this story with a fantastic scientist consultant called Martin Amos, and we had a brilliant time just talking through all the possibilities that we could explore with the science that we were looking at. As we were coming up with ideas and we'd go, oh, maybe that's not probable or possible, then Martin would do some research and go, well, actually, yep, they're already doing that. So it was a really exciting project to work on, using these kind of scientific principles and thinking about how they'll just drop into everyday society. We see that all the time now, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that there was the uncanny relevance with the scientific reasoning behind it, or scientific laws behind it. It harks back to those kind of stories like Frankenstein and Mary Shelley stories, where, because we have descriptions of this Backtoe garden having a life of its own. Just this idea that, I don't know if it goes back to this kind of new approach to your writing of letting things go out into the world and not controlling so much its kind of meaning. But I guess there's there's definitely a less risky element in your stories, and there is somebody like a monster like Frankenstein.
And I think, it's that evolution, isn't it? And I talk to my students all the time about, like, continual development. Like, we're never finished, we're never done as humans. Like, whatever, that goes across the board, whether it's about learning and, or developing our craft or our skills in whatever area. So I see myself in that way as well, like this kind of, I'm writing in a certain way now, but I know my writing will continue to develop, and it's exciting to sort of see what else can I do, what else can I explore, and I think that goes for all of us, like to be able to continue to try new things and experiment, and not to be afraid of that. It's a bit scary.
It is scary, isn't it? But like I say, you just got to keep pushing the boundaries, and what is safely gathered, and when does that word safely become a problem rather than a like a safety mechanism. But Sarah Schofield, thank you very much for joining me on the Rippling Pages podcast. Safely Gathered In is out now, published by Comma Press. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks very much, Sarah, for joining me today, and of course my thanks to you, the listener, for joining me as well. I do hope you'll join me next time, when I'm going to be joined by the poet Caroline Clark. If you've enjoyed today's episode, why not give us a follow on Rippling_Pages, and that's for both Twitter and Instagram. And you can see more follow-up from the episode you've just listened to today. But otherwise, it's until next time. Thanks for listening.